Hi, na, 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 na. Nine, 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 nine. Friends, welcome. Purim Sameach. Happy Purim to you. I see only Eileen has shown up in costume today. So the shame on the rest of us. But no, Eileen, thank you for bringing your Purim spirit. I hope everyone is having a meaningful Purim to the extent that you engage. We at VBM just had a great Purim party here last night, and just this morning had a learning session, which recording you can get. And Gary was at those and is somehow still here, which is wonderful. So thank you for being here. This is session 39 on kindness. I can't wait to engage your thoughts on this topic of Hitlamdut, a life of constantly learning. Constantly learning. Let's start with a poll question. Learning from everything and everyone is hard for me because I'm really just not so into a lot of people. Option 2, I'm really just not so interested in learning about things I don't know about. Option 3, I'm really more into entertainment than learning. Or 4, oh my gosh, I'm just learning everywhere all the time. Right? So option 4 means you are a constant learner. Not the first 3 options admit some barriers to our learning. I'm gonna submit. Okay, let's see what we got, if we have results yet. Okay, nobody said they're just not into a lot of people, although I'm sure that's partially true for many of us. No, 29% say not so interested in learning about things I don't know much about. Nobody said I'm more into entertainment than learning, right? That they'd rather just go to the opera or Suns game rather than a class. And 71% said, oh my gosh, I'm just learning everywhere all the time. Of course, that's what this group would say, because this is a group of lifelong learners. Okay, beautiful. Here we go. Hitlamdut is a new and wonderful way of life, not just in the study of Torah, but in all areas of life, right? What an exciting way to live, he wants to argue. Here is one of the origins of the idea in Pirkei Avot. Ben Zoma says, who is wise? One who learns from every person. As it says, from all my students, I gained wisdom, right? The wise one is not somebody who has a doctorate or who read the whole Talmud. It's not what somebody knows, but rather it is the ability to learn from everyone. Indeed, at the core of Judaism is a commitment to lifelong learning. It seems Benjamin Franklin was inspired by this Mishnah's teaching. I know he studied a lot, so maybe he studied this Mishnah also, because here's what Benjamin Franklin wrote in the Poor Richard's Almanac. Who is wise, literally exact words, he that learns from everyone. Who is powerful, he that governs his passions. Who is rich, he that is content. Who is that? Nobody. So he gives a little cynical twist at the end, which the Mishnah doesn't give. But he must have for sure read that Mishnah, because he literally is who is wise, who is powerful, who is rich. That is exactly Pirkei Avot 4:1. So he was a great scholar, but in any case, he's got that fun twist at the end. Commenting on this Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, the Bartanura teaches, he who learns from every person, even though that person that he learns from is lesser than he, since he is not concerned about his honor and learns from the lesser ones, it shows that his wisdom is for the sake of heaven and not to boast and revel in. Right? That some people want wisdom for social capital, right? Why do I want to learn something? So I can tell people what I know, right? But one who isn't in it for social capital, but for the sake of learning, he wants to say is what is the deeper spirit here. Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv, the founder of the Kelm Yeshiva, lots of jokes about Kelm, writes, every person that has a special feeling for a certain endeavor will be extremely sensitive when she sees any little thing having to do with it. For example, when a tailor meets someone, he will immediately look at his clothes, the shoemaker at the shoes, the milliner at the hat. Similarly, a business person will be sensitive to any words or actions that have impact on his business. Another type of person would not see or hear any of these things because her heart is not given to inquire and investigate anything from these matters. If one is not engaged in such activities, one will not notice them when performed by others. If this is the case, one who learns from every person, behold, this is a great business person. They trade in everything, and thus they understand the necessity to learn from the other, and they are called wise. Rabbi Simcha Zissel continues, if in all my actions I am only learning, then I always see a place for improvement and great wholeness. Anyone who wants to work on themselves needs to understand well the depth of these things. So that's very interesting. If we extended that to an ethical consciousness as well, we might say, oh, we have our own sensitivities. Maybe I have a disability, so I'm very sensitive to disability issues. Maybe I am a minority, and so I'm very sensitive when people talk disparagingly about that minority group, right? Maybe I have some other kind of trigger based on my own trauma that I'm very sensitive to. But he says, oh yeah, everyone is going to be sensitive to things in their realm, but by learning from everyone, it expands our realm of sensitivity. Yes, I'm not the one affected by that type of hate speech, and yet I am sensitive to it because I see you, right? I've learned from you, right? Or I'm not sensitive to that type of marginalization. That's not really my experience, but I see it. And so part of learning from everyone can be a form of allyship in that we are sensitive to things that are not our personal issues. And so that's, I think, part of what he's talking about in terms of they're also about different trades. The rabbis instruct us. Rabbi Yochanan said, if the Torah had not been given, we could have learned modesty from a cat, right, which is a joke, not stealing from ants, which is a joke, fidelity from a pigeon, and proper sexual relations from a rooster who appeases its partner before engaging in sexual behavior. Okay, so the rabbis have a sense of humor also, but they're partially teaching us that that not everything we learn is through revelation, so to speak, but is also through natural morality by observing the world around us. Rav Volbe teaches on this. There's no place for arrogance in Hitlamdut. If I do some action well, behold, I have not done anything to be proud of, because I'm only mitlamed, practicing. And when I am mitlamed, I recognize that the action was not done perfectly. Excuse me for my coughs today. And so he introduces an important idea here, that everything we're doing is practicing, right? We might think of ourselves as performing or just living, but everything we're doing, if it's in the spirit of learning, is just another form of practicing. Everything is just the training ground or a learning laboratory, if you will. Rav Volbe is teaching here that in our learning, whether experiential or textual, must be constant. We are forever in a state of practicing, never quite perfecting our knowledge and skill, as there's always room for improvement and to learn more. I've always wondered if that's why some people call their business a practice, right? It's my practice, right? Just as there is value to learn from others, there's equal value to learning with others. The Talmud teaches, Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens the countenance of their friend. This verse comes to tell you that just as these iron implements, one sharpens the other when they are rubbed against each other, so too, when Torah scholars study together, they sharpen one another in their legal studies. Abraham Joshua Heschel writes, the prophet is not a mouthpiece, but a person, not an instrument, but a partner, an associate of God. Emotional detachment would be understandable only if there were a command which required the suppression of emotion, forbidding one to serve God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. But God, we are told, asks not only for action, but above all for love, awe, and fear. Learning then is not to be viewed as an end in and of itself, but rather a vehicle by which one comes closer to God. By extension, when one learns with another, they have the opportunity to become closer and be in awe of one another. Right? The learning with a partner is not just about the content, but about the relationship. Indeed, Hitlamdut has the power to transform one into a more loving, caring individual, right? So we might have said, why should we learn from everyone? Because learning is great. But also, what we're seeing here, learning from everyone is also great for relationships. If people feel we're interested in what they have to say, right? And we genuinely are, it builds kind of a mutuality, a respect. Dr. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and founder of logotherapy, writes, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth of our and our freedom. I've noticed in my house something unusual about my son's experience in Jewish preschool. Recently, more and more upon getting home from school, my 4-year-old son, Shay, tells my wife, Shoshana, and I how much he loved that day's yoga session. Over the years, my kids have been exposed to this kind of practice throughout their preschool experiences, and seeing its impact on my son on days when he does yoga and how he seems more centered and more thoughtful has made me wish this experience were given to kids of all ages throughout the Jewish world and in society at large. Of course, there's so many areas of development in preschool, from letters and numbers to social skills to moral growth. But with all that noise, holy noise often, I want to make the case for just how important it is to learn how to breathe, calm oneself, sit in silence, expand one's consciousness, and increase one's attention span. We know all about how to get our kids ahead in math and science, but what are we doing to help them learn to boost their sense of self-awareness, increase their oxygen circulation, and reduce their stress? Mindfulness education is necessary for numerous reasons. For an obvious one, we all know of the importance of physical health. Yoga and meditation are helpful not just for the mind, but for our kids' growing bodies. But also, studies from 2016 to 2019 show that 9.8% of children have ADHD, 9.4% suffer from anxiety, 8.9% have behavior problems, and 4.4% suffer from depression. In a world in which technology has made mental health one of the greatest crises of our time, the need to proactively improve our kids' mental strength and spiritual resiliency cannot be ignored. Emerging research studies also suggest that yoga can help children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder by improving the core symptoms of ADHD, including inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Certified yoga teacher Dr. Marilyn Y. wrote in Harvard Health Publishing, it can also boost school performance in children with ADHD. Yoga specifically and mindfulness in general are catalysts for better learning. The New York Times reports, at this age, mindfulness practice can also help children in school. A recent study found that 4th and 5th graders who took a 4-month meditation program demonstrated improvements in cognitive control, working memory, and math test scores. Other studies have shown that mindfulness can be especially helpful to children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and also reduce children's aggression, anxiety, and stress. Furthermore, mindfulness is indeed crucial for moral development. A quieter and more controlled mind has great potential for expanding the capacity for empathy. It improves one's midot, character traits, such as menuchat nefesh, equanimity, Hitlamdut, our topic today, learning from everything, and anivut, humility or managing the ego. These are but 3 of many midot that can be cultivated through mindfulness. And beyond a moral and ethical aid, mindfulness can be an explicitly spiritual experience. Yes, our schools often do a great job of teaching Jewish holidays, the Hebrew language, and even Jewish rituals, but they're often not sufficiently teaching children how to search for and feel God's presence, for example. The starting place of the religious journey should be the realization of the soul, as the search for God is not primarily intellectual, but achieved through the channel of the soul. By training their minds today, our kids will be equipped to have better and more meaningful Jewish prayer as they get older. But a prayer curriculum, as important as it can be, cannot replace a mindfulness one. A mindfulness practice expands the inner container that we call the soul, whereas a prayer practice is an expression emanating from that container. The enterprises, while still separate pedagogically, are in fact linked. Maybe most importantly, spiritual practices honor our children's innate dignity. Through mindfulness, they learn that they're valuable not only for their academic achievements or soccer goals scored, but also just for being themselves. In school, we're very good at teaching kids about doing, but we don't lastingly teach students about being. We give them a long to-do list, but not a space to fulfill a to-be list. In our chaotic world that will only make our kids more anxious as they grow up, it is, in my view, indispensable that we give them a strong foundation, not only in pure academic skills, but in healthy breathing and mindfulness. If our children do not go on to live mentally healthy lives, everything else they learn in school will be of diminished benefit. Instead of letting them be overwhelmed by the world, we should be teaching them how to answer God's greatest question in Genesis: where are you? As humans, we need to be training ourselves to be able to answer not like Adam, who responds that he was hiding from God because he was afraid, but like Abraham, who boldly proclaims, "Here I am." I believe the way we accomplish this should be to have yoga or other forms of mind-body meditational experiences offered to 3-year-olds, 4th graders, summer campers, high school seniors, adults, and everyone in between. Mindfulness education should be available not only in preschools, but also in day schools, Hebrew schools, camps, and synagogues. All of us, young children and lifelong learners alike, can think about how to become more present, to listen, learn, and make each moment filled with curiosity. Only with practice can we learn to be like the psalmist who says, "Return my soul to restfulness." Hitlamdut and all of its expressions, including those we explored above and more, serves as a basis and springboard for being there for ourselves and in turn for one another, propelling us toward greater acts of kindness. Okay, friends, I would love to open our conversation about Hitlamdut, how we can live a life of constant learning. Yes, Gary.
Well, I'll start off. I want to go back to your first part of the lecture when we talked about how do we do that, and obviously you all know I'm in the healthcare profession by now. I've always taught my students, both in the classroom and clinically, that we're in a profession of lifelong self-directed learning. And when I explained that to them, it's not just about in the healthcare field, but it's also about life, and that everybody and everything can and should be a learning experience. You don't stop your learning when you finish medical school or a residency program, and you don't stop living when you go to work, that everybody has something to learn, even if you disagree with them. And we see that, in my opinion, of what's going on now in our political scene. People just don't want to listen to the other side. They just shut them down, and then it just happens to be, well, we see what's happening, not only in our country, but in the world. And another comment, more directed to the Jewish world, it would be very nice that if Jews of all persuasion, left to right, would open themselves up to learn from each other. I have very close friends for many years that are Orthodox. If you look at their library, Jewish library, and my Jewish library are like completely opposite. I have traditional text, I have very liberal text, and anything and everything in between, because I want to continue to learn. And we have difficulty discussing Jewish issues because we just can't come to a point, at least discussing Jewish text, because we come from a completely different mindset. If I bring up something about Joshua Heschel, and they'll go, "Who's that?" So it would be nice that we live by the words that our Jewish sages tell us. I think we'd have a much better and stronger Jewish world. And
amazing, Gary. Thank you for that. Both the parts around how in all of our professions, we need to constantly be learning, and how important that is to remaining sharp and in touch and helpful. But also addressing polarization. How do we flip our judgment into curiosity, right? Imagine if we approached people that we strongly disagreed with, rather than with judgment and rebuke, but with curiosity, with questions, in the interest of learning, without necessarily validating. That would be great. And then the other issue you raise around how, if none of us are reading the same things, how could we have any common culture? If Orthodox Jews and Reformed Jews are actually reading totally different books, our Judaism are going to continue to diverge. if people are listening to CNN or Fox News, there's literally living in different realities of America that are a whole different sense of what's happening. And so how do we have some ability to listen to things that others are listening to and read things that others are listening to bridge some of those divides. Eileen, hi, Eileen.
Hi, call me Esther today.
Oh, we'll call you Esther today, yes.
It seems to me that many people graduate, get a degree, and then they say, that's it, I've learned all there is to learn. And I find this extremely sad that they don't read or they won't explore, they won't go to a museum. They're closed. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I suspect everybody here on the call is pursuing education because they're interested in creating more resources for themselves. And I think that probably distinguishes us from the majority of people. The second thing, I watch Park Avenue Synagogue services. They are conservative. I am Reform, but I cannot tell you the difference in their service as compared to mine. They have an organ, they have a little orchestra. The music is the same. The sermons are good. So from my perspective, conservatism and Reform seem to have come together in many aspects.
Great, Eileen, thanks for that. Yes, I think there are definitely national trends of how Reformed Judaism and conservative Judaism are really merging, are really ultimately merging based on both the Reform movement embracing a little bit more of a traditional approach over the last decade and the conservative movement moving left, and partially financial as well, is that the conservative movement kind of continues to collapse nationally. Reform is growing, Orthodox is growing in various ways, and conservative movement is struggling. Just like the middle, I mean, if you call conservative the middle is kind of collapsing in America also in some ways. But yes, and to your first point, I love that around the need for professional continued learning. Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who was the founder of the renewal movement, kind of the hippy-dippy spiritual movement out of Boulder, Colorado. He once said, yes, when you're ordained a rabbi, you become a rabbi. But until someone comes to you seeking God, you're not a Rebbe. So too, it's like you may get your MD, right? But your MD on the wall doesn't make you a doctor. It kind of gives you the degree, right? You're the doctor when you're caring for people and continuing. And so too, like you have a wedding document on your wall, ketubah or whatever, right? That's the beginning, not the end. Some people view the degree or the license as the end. Like I made it, right? But that's the beginning of kind of the learning journey rather than the end. Beautiful. Yeah. Hi, Toby.
Hi, I've been gone for a while and I missed you guys.
Yes, welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. A couple of things, just expanding on what Eileen said, not only in your professional life, but even when you retire, there's a lot of studies out there that show that seniors or people over whatever age you want to choose, if they continue learning things, they don't suffer from as much dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other brain degradations and things like that. And the same thing goes for physical. We're talking mostly about learning mental stuff, but if you stop moving around when you get older, or even when you're young, your muscles don't like that, and your body doesn't like that. And if you don't use it, you lose it. I hate to use those kind of stereotypes, but it's really true. So that goes for both the physical and the mental continuation of learning.
That's so helpful, Toby. Yeah, the power of movement, physical and kind of mental movement, to kind of keep everything fresh and and adaptive and plastic. I mean, kind of, in the sense of neuroplasticity, and so thank you for that. And yeah, and that dementia point is so real. And oftentimes we think of learning as engaging in material that kind of confirms what I already know. But that's actually not going to achieve that goal necessarily. It's that challenge, it's that cognitive dissonance, it's that disconnect that we have to work through that kind of enables us to kind of remain sharp. So thank you, Toby. And we're happy to have your voice back here too, even though you're in Istanbul. Is that Istanbul? Yeah, okay. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. I'm fascinated by a couple of things. One is that there are people in professions who continue to learn, but they only learn what they already know.
Right.
They, in fact, I think about medicine, and you become more and more specialized and you only read these journals. And how many times I would look at my residents and they'd say, well, how do you know that? I was like, well, I was a doctor before I became an anesthesiologist, okay? And people we narrow our vision, I'm assuming, because we fear that it's about our ego and how will we be seen? What if I don't know everything? What if people see that I don't have answers? Oh my gosh, who will I be? And fear is a huge, huge part of how we lose that amazing curiosity that we came into the world with, that desire to learn and grow and become. And people forget that we are constantly becoming. We are not finished.
Right.
I hope I'm not finished until I'm done. And the other part that I was interested in your production was the kids, and the kids who benefit. I know from meditation, now I'm learning from yoga, but I'm also curious because a lot of those children also who are showing up with many of those difficulties are suffering from trauma and significant trauma. And the trauma doesn't go away. Yes, we may help them control some of their behaviors, but unless those underlying issues are addressed, then behavior in school particularly will be better, or at home. But these children are still going to struggle and suffer and find ways of coping in the world. So I don't want to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And I'm complete.
Thank you, Sarah, so much there. Yeah, it's really amazing because our physical growth stops. We're like, in our teen years, or or wherever it stops for us. But our mental development doesn't. And we think like, oh, that stuff was all for my youth. I was curious when I was 2, and I was growing when I was a teenager. But it's interesting. We used to think of there was childhood, and there were teenage years, and then there was adulthood. But just a few decades ago, the developmental psychologists invented the stage called emerging adulthood, which was between teen years and adulthood. And at first they thought that was 18 to 26. The psychologist said that's why birthright made those years 18 to 26, because of the psychological studies that time was called emerging adulthood. But then they expanded it. They said actually emerging adulthood doesn't have 26. It actually goes much longer than that. And they had these 5 categories of what defines adulthood, right? Things that may feel arbitrary, things like having a life partner, having your own, home, having a career, these having a child. They even said these things that kind of, these milestones that moved someone to this next stage of kind of maturation. But in addition to that, there's adult development. Bob Keegan, who is a psychologist, is one of the greatest scholars of this, Robert Keegan, on adult development. And people oftentimes fall into just playing defense. Defense meaning I'm just going to deal with my problems as they come. Okay, fine, I got to grieve now. My parent died. Oh, now I got to deal with this health challenge. I'm just playing defense, as opposed to offensively, so to speak, kind of actively pushing to next developmental stages, as one does when they're going from 3rd grade to 4th grade, or as they do when they're leaping from high school to college? How do we actually create our own life curriculum actively rather than passively just responding to the bad things that happen around us? And so that's exciting. That's exciting, you know, because we do have to play defense, especially as we get older and challenges become more often. But we haven't built in these life cycles. It was like, okay, there's a celebration of our birth, and then we have a bar bat mitzvah, and then we graduate high school, graduate college, we get married, we have a baby, woohoo. And then all those things stop. And then it's like, okay, death, right? So like, how do we build more milestones in there to kind of celebrate growth? And one of the things I love about Judaism actually is a siyum. We're going to have a little siyum. A siyum is a celebration of completion of learning. When we complete this 40-part series of kindness next week, we will have the chance to kind of celebrate, like, wow, look, what a thing to commit 40 weeks to thinking about kindness. I mean, how many living people or people of the past committed 40 weeks of their lives to like thinking about how to be more kind in the world? And so that's a milestone to celebrate. So yeah, thank you. Yes, Gary.
I'd like to respond to Sarah for a moment concerning fear. Now that I'm 70, hard to believe, and kind of semi-retired, I don't have any fear of my days are going to end, but it's not a personal fear. Is that I can't find enough time in the day to do all my reading, to continue to research. I've always had a thirst for knowledge, even as a kid, and I just, you know, there's so much to learn in the world that I just can't seem to find enough time in the day to quench that thirst. You know, I was with Shmuly this morning. I'm here. You know, I have some professional things I need to do. I want to read this article, that article. I want to read this book and that book. And to me, that's I'm self-directed learning, which I've always said. And I think that, and to add what Shmuly says, as we've gotten older, that thirst, that defense, or being more offensive, is better than being defensive. And so I just wanted to respond to Sister Sarah that it's not an internal fear. It's just that there's so much out there. I don't want to miss anything. It's like going to Disneyland. I don't want to miss any ride. You know, I'll stand in line for hours and hours to get to that one ride. And so it's that.
Love that.
That's the same idea.
Love that. You know, and that resonates for me a lot too. Like, there's this learning space, and then there's all these distractions from that learning space. But I wonder if we can think of those distractions from the learning space as the learning space also, right? Rather than trusting authorities, we read things and we trust them. How do we experiment with it, right? Like, you know, try this yourself. You know, we read something and then let's go try it out. Let's see how that feels in the world, and viewing that as a learning space as well, like the practice space, and then the reflection space. And yes, but Gary, your point resonates for me a lot, of like I just have these books stacked up right now. I'm like, how am I going to get to this stuff? And yes, and Eileen, I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, speed reading. The greatest thing of being retired is that I'm in 4 different book clubs. And as you know, I read a lot of books, but I learn, and it's enjoyable, and it adds, I think, more to my character than not. I think the pursuit of learning is something that maybe is taught at an early age, depending upon your home life. And all I can say is my home life, because my dad was an educator, focused on learning. And the fact that I graduated and had a degree, I got a 2nd degree, went on for a 3rd, didn't change the intellectual curiosity that I had and still have. And I find that curiosity has led me to experience a lot more things.
Yeah.
And I think without the curiosity, I probably would be overeducated, but under responsive to life.
Thank you, Esther. Beautiful. Love it. And, I actually, one of the ways I might diagnose actually our problem of assimilation in the American Jewish community is not just that, the product is bad, Judaism is not interesting, and also not just, blaming the customer, so to speak, in the sense that, that they're, anti-religion or anti-tradition or whatever the case is. But I think actually part of our failure has been in cultivating this spirit of learning. And in many ways, the American Jewish community has become very materialistic, that the pursuit of wealth and just the obsession with entertainment distracts from just this sense of commitment to learning. That if you look at the trends of careers that Jews were interested in a few decades ago, and you look at it today, it's really narrowed. And not to be judgmental towards those fields, because people can pursue whatever they want. But if the majority of Jews are pursuing 3 or 4 types of careers rather than the full range, what's that about? And what's happened to kind of our intellectual culture that has kind of a breadth and depth to it? And how do we reawaken that a lot of Jews aren't showing up, not because of a barrier to God or a barrier to community or religion, but oftentimes because they're not interested in learning. They're interested in making money and watching a good movie. I want entertainment and money. And that's not being overcritical of anyone. Nothing wrong with entertainment, nothing wrong with making money. But like, how do we reawaken that Jewish ethos of like being a community of learning and raise children and grandchildren like that are intrigued and curious, in the world? Okay, Ethan, over to you.
Hey, Rabbi. Had 2 quick points. The first is not super tangential to the point you just made, but I'll come back to that. I just wanted to touch on a subcategory of learning that I think we have delved into here, which is learning about ourself. Rabbi, you've talked about meditation, and there are a variety of different ways that we can go through our lives in which we are educating ourselves about who we are, the platform that we stand on, the morals that we believe in, a wide variety of finding sort of who we are in our identity. And I just want to take a moment to challenge everyone in this room to think about the privilege that we may or may not have in our ability to do that. For example, I was thinking about a good friend of mine who is a trans person and going through the transitioning of genders right now. And I was talking to them recently about the difficulty because of their gender identity to freely and easily express themselves and learn about themselves and understanding who they are as a person. And so I think it's important for all of us when we think about this, not only to think about what is our prospects of learning about ourselves, but also how can we make it easier, more accessible for others to learn about themselves as well? Because I do think that it's an incredibly important part of our maturation process is that education about ourselves. The second point that I was going to make that is more tangential to what you just talked about, Rabbi, is in your opening question, you talked about one response was, I don't enjoy learning about others or learning because I enjoy entertainment. And I wonder, I think this room is a very unique room of people who are interested and excited about learning. I would wonder if we pose that poll to a broader audience, how many people would, if they had to respond authentically and truly, would choose that bullet point because they're more interested in getting on social medias and finding a quick sort of dopamine hit instead of really doing challenging learning that is going to make us uncomfortable and push us where we are. And so, I would again ask the room to consider, how do we inspire others to do what is already happening in this room, but to do it outside of this room and help others who may not be as interested in learning do it, because I think we all agree it's so important. in an active time.
Fascinating
So,
points. Yeah, Ethan, fascinating points. Thank you for that. And yeah, and that's a good challenge to ourselves as well when we want that dopamine hit rather than going even deeper. You know, and on your first point, there was a famous mystic who said something like, know yourself and you'll know God, right? Which is to say, the deeper we go into ourselves. And it's interesting that you brought up the trans folks, because sometimes more marginalized populations have more of a self-awareness because they've had to go kind of deeper. For example, white folks in America often talk about blackness, right? But how many white people have a conversation of whiteness? Like, what does it mean to be white, right? Like, as opposed to just not being black, right? And so too, a lot more women have had conversations of what it means to be a woman. Lots of various feminist literature and women's groups. How many men are in men's groups being like, what does it mean to be a man in kind of a healthy way today? And queer folks think about their sexuality or their gender identities in ways that people who haven't, who were just kind of raised straight, think of that as, oh, I'm in the normal camp, right? This is normal and that's different, right? As opposed to kind of examining what is taken for granted, right? Oh, I'm a white straight man, and so that's the normal thing. And then there's like these other folks we should understand without understanding oneself. And so there is this interesting task of like taking the parts of ourselves we take for granted as just being normal and actually examining that. Well, what does that mean to me? Why am I that? That's also true for those who just took for granted that they were Jewish in a certain sense as well. Yeah, so thank you for that. And yeah, I think sometimes there is a depth to minorities because they've gone through that examination process. Like, do I want to be Jewish publicly or just privately? Like in being trans, like I had to go through some journey of discovery of who I am, right? The discovery is not just external. What career am I going to do? Who's my life partner? What house am I going to live in? But like, who am I at my core, you know? And that too should be lifelong discovery, a lifelong journey, if we believe there's many layers there. So yes, back to you, Esther.
I have 3 lovely grandchildren, and when I stay with them, one of my objectives is to make them curious about the world around them and to offer them things that they normally wouldn't do. So at Thanksgiving, we had a high tea. My grandson did the invitations. One of my granddaughters set the table. The other one made the food, and they loved it. We had a great time. When I go up there, we have a painting class, a la Bob Ross, which they also enjoy. My daughter takes them every weekend on a walk in a forest where they look at nature and look at the changes and what's happening. So we are trying to instill intellectual curiosity at an early age, knowing that that will continue to grow. The other thing, when you talked about women's groups, I am a member of a wise aging group, which theoretically is for mixed people over 60. As it turns out, mostly women. Very few men join. And I think many men could learn and get some emotional support from being in these groups. And yet, nope, it's the women. Now, we're going to live longer, and we're going to have to do things on our own. And we're going to have to learn how to have the resilience. But here we are meeting every week and talking about aging. We are proactive, which I think is the word we want to use.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. Yeah, we do have a challenge today on boys and men's participation in general. Boys and men's friendships are declining. Membership is declining. And girls and women continue to be more collective in many ways. And part of this has the relationship to shame and vulnerability of how we share in groups, that men kind of have a different relationship to this vulnerability and public sharing than women often do. Because of course, these are generalizations, but in general, Yeah, and there's really a lot to gain from that. And what do we do? What do we do with that? And just like men need to step back in a lot of spaces in society to create more room for women. So too, like, I wonder in how some of those spaces, women might also think about, like, how do we make space for men to share here differently, right? How do we create space for each other in different ways so that everyone can kind of be here? And I know this is happening in Jewish life too. Some of the recent stats I saw were that 7 out of 10 or even 8 out of 10 of participants in programming are girls, not boys, and are women, not men. That men are kind of fading out of Judaism, kind of, they call it the feminization of Judaism, of liberal Judaism. Of course, that's outside of Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is a whole different phenomenon. But yeah, so thank you for flagging that. And I think there's really, yeah, please.
Perhaps some of the outreach should be geared to forming men's group, because I think men are more comfortable sharing with other men rather than having a mixed group. But yeah, I absolutely agree. All the committees, and I'm on lifelong learning.
Yeah.
It's women, 99%.
Right. Thank you. Steve, did I see you? Are you going to jump in with us, Steve? No, is that yes or no? Yes, good.
Hi. Just a couple of things. And again, I've loved every letter and word and breath from everybody today. I mean, it's so invigorating. I wish that was the answer to Ethan's quest for different crowds. I always think to enhance one's interest in a certain thing that we're interested in, entertainment and free food goes a long way. In the beginning, you were talking about learning with others. I love that. I cannot think of one thing. Well, I actually can think of two things in my life where I would not want to be with another person, but most everything in my life is enhanced by celebrating or learning or doing with somebody else. I get so much excitement just from proximity. And so I can understand how learning with others can really enhance one's self-learning. Number two, you use the phrase search for God. And I can't even imagine the end to that search for God. And I'm wondering if God is afraid of being discovered. And one of the reasons I say that is that somebody told me she had ADHD, and I said, what is that? She said, the fear of being discovered. We don't want to let people know that we don't know. We're afraid of admitting our weaknesses. I don't know if she is right on that. But in fact, one of the worst things about being 80 is I can't remember where I'm going with half the sentences that I start. So you'll have to excuse me.
It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me what you're saying. Yeah.
But I'll just end there. Is God afraid of being discovered? And number two, I love being close to people in almost any of them.
You left us all curious of what two things are that you don't want someone to be with you. You don't have to share that if you don't want, but you left us all curious.
You don't even have to use your imagination for one of those things.
Okay, going to the bathroom perhaps is probably one of them.
Yes,
okay.
And you get $100 for that.
And the other one will we'll leave to imagination. Yeah, but thank you. This notion of fear of being discovered is a fascinating point. In fact, today on Purim, one of the ideas of why we wear masks, we wear costumes, is a reminder to learn how to take them off. We kind of practice putting on a mask and taking it off on Purim to learn that we're kind of always wearing different layers of masks, and to learn how to take them off in the willingness to be discovered, to be seen. And that can be very scary because, unfortunately, our society, and I don't know whether to blame our society or whether it's a perennial problem, has given us a deep sense of insecurity of who we are, that we have been raised and cultivated to think we're just not enough. I don't know enough. I don't, at my core, I'm not enough. And we were, many of us were praised as kids for things we did well, rather than for being good at our core, right? If we're only praised for things we do well, we find our value in those things we do, as opposed to in our core. And so we're constantly trying to hide our core because we don't feel it's good enough. And what it means to turn that towards God is a fascinating question, Steve, of what it means, to not be found. It's like that old story around the child who is playing hide and seek, and then finds that no one is even looking for her, and she's crying, realizing the kids have moved on, they're not even looking for her, right? The sense of like what it means to not be sought out, what it means to not want, that you don't feel somebody wants to kind of discover you. So thank you for that. And Heschel has his book, Man in Search of God, but then he has a different book called God in Search of Man, of like who is seeking who actually. Eric, over to you.
Thank you. This has been really wonderful. I think that it's been a great topic talked about regarding constantly learning, but the betterment of who. And I know that there has been focus on other topics, previous weeks, where that the focus inwards in order to focus on oneself inwards and be able to be the betterment of to outwards. But also this idea of mitzvah, performing a mitzvah is doing good deeds towards community, towards others, the nuclear family, community, whatever the direction is. But I wonder if the constantly learning approach, the way that Judaism, the Jewish scholars are kind of advocating, is the constantly learning not just towards God, but is it constantly learning the priority towards inward again, with the betterment that then if I am constantly learning inwards, then I can be able to apply what I've learned, outwards. Because I'm wondering if that is the approach of what that's been advocated, versus I am learning, knowing I'm going to be able to act on it towards the benefit of community, towards the benefit of society, my shul, my family, my friends. I've wondered I wonder if that's the direction that Jewish scholars are taking when it comes to the idea of he's not mute.
Beautiful, Eric. Thank you so much for that. And you remind me of the great Pirkei Avot that is worth looking at again, around why do we choose to learn something? Is it just in order to teach it? Is it in order to practice it? Right? Why are we learning something? Is it learning lishma, learning for its own sake? And I love what you said, that kind of learning for the inward purpose, and only kind of secondarily kind of for that outward performance. Sometimes we learn things that are just urgent for us to learn, like how to build this desk I now need to use, right? But how do we learn things and allow it to kind of transform us and not be so clear yet what it's going to mean externally or how we're going to use it? I read recently that 40% of those who go to a psychologist, their core reason for going, they may not know this at first, is unresolved grieving. Unresolved grieving. 40%, it said. Isn't it astounding? Not depression or anxiety, right? That actually their parent or spouse or child or somebody died in their life and they never really went through the full grieving process, or they did and it's still unresolved. And just like if somebody is, has deep fatigue, you can't just use caffeine to get through it. You actually have to sleep. Sleep is not going to be enough, but the first thing you got to do is sleep. So too, if one has to grieve, the first thing you got to do is actually grieve. And a lot of people in our society turn away from that. And so too, like a deep part of learning is going through the internal journey that our life at that moment requires of us. And so oftentimes there's an illness, but we don't look at it, right? There's a grieving, but we don't deal with it. There's something changing within us that we don't fully kind of immerse in a learning in a way that then creates a disorder. A disorder where our one of the ways to think of this disorder is when what we call a mood mistakenly, when we have kind of a deep emotional reaction to something that that is not kind of triggered externally. It's kind of unpredictable. It means something kind of unresolved over there. And so this disorder that comes with an unresolved grieving. And so too, like there's things that happen in our lives that we never fully learned through. Something traumatic or even positive happened, but we never kind of immersed in the learning about it, immersed in the curiosity about it. And so it's sitting in us unresolved in a way that's begging us to return to. And so, yeah, Eric, thanks for that. And so I do think that this type of Jewish learning, it starts inward. It starts in a deep kind of internal transformative journey before it goes outwards. Yeah, let's take one more person. Yes, Gary.
Sorry to monopolize. I just, since we're at a VBM group, I don't know how many of you have been around with VBM, but it was interesting that VBM started way back when a group of Jewish adults said, we want more learning that they weren't getting from synagogues and other institutions. And here we are, I don't know, 15 years or whatever later, that we've expanded to this type of learning. So it's interesting. There are Jews that are adults that want to continue their learning. And I just one final comment about learning, Jewish learning, that I think one of the things that the progressive movements have failed in is that Jewish learning stops at age 13 and then we're done. And Orthodox Judaism, bar mitzvah is just the beginning of their learning. And actually conservative Judaism back in the 50s or 60s had really contemplated about bar mitzvah at 16, not at 13. So a lot of us, as even our educated Jews, still look at Judaism as what I call pediatric Judaism. We've never moved beyond that. And I think that's one of the issues of keeping adult Jews connected to Judaism, because they constantly still see it as a big man in the sky with a gray beard, and not understand there's so much more depthness to Judaism that guides us to living.
Love that. Yes, and as Eileen posted on the side, yeah, the reform. I haven't read studies on whether it's been successful or not, but the reform movement's attempt to respond to that was, yeah, the confirmation process. But we need so much more. Yeah, I mean, you're right. What a shunda that like there's this 2 years of immersing to prepare for a bar bat mitzvah, and then it ends and literally it's like checked out the door. It's like they memorized this Torah portion, which was irrelevant to their lives, and then are just totally disinterested because it like was so, it burned them out. But yeah, I one other thing, and your fair critique about the failure of progressive camps as well is, I think that the death of learning is partially due to ideology. Ideology means like I have a kind of a neat system of thought tied up with a bow, and anything that doesn't fit in with that ideology, I am conservative, I am progressive, I am a Reformed Jew, Orthodox Jew. Anything that doesn't fit into my ideology, just discard it, right? And ideology is so deadening, right? In terms of like, of these identities that we're so committed to, and anything that doesn't fit into that identity and that ideology has to be discarded. And that's why I would love to see a post-ideological Judaism. We move away from denominations. We move away from just partisan simplicity into like a realm of like, I'm going to consider a whole bunch of ideas that counter like narrow ideologies. So friends, in that spirit of Hitlamdut, I hope we all continue to learn together and learn in isolated spaces, whether it's in the bathroom or whatever the second place is that we don't want people with us. And next week will be session 40 of kindness. And then we're going to launch into looking at the 40 greatest philosophers and our potential relationship to them. Wishing everyone a happy Purim, and a reminder that the greatest mitzvah of Purim, according to Maimonides, is gifts to the poor today. This is a day to help take care of the poor. If you can't come with us at 3 o'clock to help to go down to the zone to deliver stuff, maybe find another way to make a contribution physically or monetary, where you can do something for the poor today. That is the highest manifestation of Purim, according to Maimonides. Have a wonderful day and happy Purim.